Hello, sisters. Welcome to the Sacred Medicine Podcast, weaving powerful, soulful practices into functional medicine. Step into this beautiful space of devotion and explore everything from nurturing foods, rituals, sexuality, and awakening your innate sensuality. It is time to own your radiance. This is the Sacred Medicine Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Sacred Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Margaret Romero, and today's guest is Suzanne Hanna. Suzanne is a healer, visionary, writer, and inspirational speaker. She has helped hundreds of men and women move through their fear and pain as a way to live a more inspired and wholehearted life. She is the founder and creator of the Wilderness Walk movement, an experiential hero's journey through the darkness and fear of the inner mind and the pain of the wounded heart in order to help others integrate all aspects of their being, both light and dark. So Suzanne is a dear friend of mine, and I invited her today for an interview. And let me tell you, she does not sugarcoat anything. She is a truth teller. And we talk about so many different topics. I have to listen to this interview again a few times because there were so many nuggets. One is about why women block their greatness and why do we have unhealthy patterns. Also, we talk about reversing that feeling of unworthiness that we sometimes have, the tools to living your fullest life, and also why we run from our power. So an amazing interview today. I hope you enjoy it. Today, my guest is Suzanne Hanna. She is someone that I met many years ago through B School. And since then, we have really developed a really nice, close, deep relationship. And she's moved out to Colorado, which is where I used to live. And Suzanne, tell me a little bit about yourself and tell me about these wilderness walks that you are a founder of. It's been a few years since you started that, and I haven't been on one yet, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, and I would love to have you on one, but basically, well, it's really a very long story about how it got started, but the gist of it is about a decade ago, I had hit an emotional bottom. I was in a very unhealthy relationship. And as I tell people, I was dying in emotional death. And a series of events happened, and I finally found what I call the 20 seconds of insane courage, and I left. And part of my healing journey was hiking in this preserve near my house with my golden retriever, Grace. And I just remember this one day as I was watching her, and she was leaping through these tall grasses and wildflowers she just embodied freedom. She was happy, she was exuberant. And I remember in that moment saying, that is how I want to live my life. That is how I want to live. And I went home that very day. I pulled out this old atlas. And within 2 weeks, we set out with absolutely no itinerary. And over the course of 3.5 years, I hiked 1,000 miles with her across the United States. And through that journey and through my own breaking open process, and through facing my own pain, shame, anger, fear, and really getting to the core and the depths of what I had spent a lifetime running from, I felt really divinely inspired to go out and teach others what I had come to learn, which is when we spend a lifetime in resistance to the things that we fear the most, or the things that are most uncomfortable, then we are running from actually the pieces of ourselves that carry the most wisdom and truth. And what I do now is I lead people on intense journeys, and they're 8 weeks long, and 7 weeks of that is online and virtual, so people could do it from anywhere. And then we do a live week-long retreat, and the whole journey is really based on trekking into the wilderness within and facing all of those pieces of ourselves that we have spent a lifetime running from. And the beautiful thing that comes out of that experience is that we get to make whatever's unconscious conscious, so that people can be able to heal some of that old wounding, those old core beliefs, so that they can truly create something new. Because as you know from what you do, that our memories live in a cellular place. So as long as we are unconscious of what lives there, then that gets played out over and over and over again. And what most healing modalities do, especially in my world, is that they get to the cognitive level, they get to sometimes the heart level, but they don't get to the cellular level. And my work is really about going into the depths of that place so that people can really shift and create a whole new script for their lives, so that they're not functioning from those old core beliefs that just keep them repeating the same patterns over and over again. And often they feel very stuck. So that's basically what the Wilderness Walk is. And I love doing it because I get to really witness men and women coming alive. And that's my greatest passion, watching people come alive.
Wow. And what do you say is the biggest block that women tend to have when they, time and time again, what is it that is blocking them from their greatness?
Well, a lot of it is coming from a core belief that they don't matter, or they're not good enough, or they're not worthy. And usually that can come from, lifetimes of experiences, situations, wounding. And so what happens is when we function from that core belief, everything that we do gets created and acted out from that place. So for instance, if we don't believe we're worthy, then we're not going to focus on our own self-care, because we're not going to take the time and the energy to do that. If we don't believe we're worthy, we're going to attract relationships in our lives that will mirror that. And so we'll go into a place of either not being able to set appropriate boundaries, or we won't be able to be vulnerable or intimate, and we'll be walled off. So what I try to work with people is, and the other thing I think that's very important for women to know especially, is that, we're conditioned to seek outside of ourselves for validation. We're conditioned to seek for answers outside of ourselves. And what we come to find is that those answers are very transient, and they're not really based on our own inner core truth. So we adopt all of these things that are not sustainable. And so over periods of time, we'll be like, okay, well, this doesn't work for me anymore. Well, of course it doesn't work for you anymore, because it's not your truth. So it's really important for us to really understand at a very deep rooted cellular level who we are and what has kept us in a place where we get stuck, or we create old patterns, or we really, this is the core thing, Margaret. If I could say this to anybody, people will say to me, why do I keep doing this over and over and over again? They blame themselves, they beat themselves up. And the truth is, they do it over and over again because it's familiar. It's what they know. And in order to do something different, you have to move into the unknown. You have to go against your own conditioning and do something new. But we don't do that because it's that old saying, the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. So we stay in a place of what I call very uncomfortable comfort. So we don't like it, but it's familiar and we know it. So that's why we keep repeating it. And it isn't until we find the courage to do something different and look into all those places that frighten us that we actually get to step out of what's familiar. And that's where the magic happens.
So when women are living in this, when they're living not in their truth,
Yep.
what are the consequences to that in their relationships and in living a full life?
Well, there's many, many consequences. And this is where the universe is brilliant in how it wakes us up. Because what will happen is that we will meet people who will be there to show us things and teach us things, but we will get to a place where we have to learn those lessons through pain. So, what I always say to people is that, pain has a very important purpose. It wakes us up, it shows us where we're out of alignment,
Right.
it shows us where we are not living in accordance to our truth. The moment you get into alignment, and the moment that you can speak your truth, and the moment that you can understand truly at a core level what it is that you need, what are negotiables, what are non negotiables, then you start not quote unquote tolerating bad situations, bad behavior, things that are more hurtful or more rewounding than healing. And that's what we do a lot as women. We get into relationships and situations that actually rewound us. And then we get the ability to say, see, I'm not good enough, or see, this is never going to happen for me, or see, I always seem to find the same kind of guy, just in a different pair of pants. And so
Yes.
what I tell people is that it's really not about them as much as it is about you and how you're showing up and the patterns that you're repeating. And then when you're rewounded, you go into a place of reinforcement as opposed to a place of learning, which is why hindsight perspective is so important, because we can look back on things and be like, wow, I see all the red flags now, but I wasn't able to see those then, because the truth is we don't want to see them. And the reason we don't want to see them is because then we would be called to do something uncomfortable.
Mm.
So,
And so, how do you actually walk them through unveiling what it is that's blocking them? And I know you go through a whole 8-week program, and then there's 1 week where you actually get together in person and go on retreat. How are you? Well, let's say a woman is feeling unworthy, and I think that's something that's very common. How are you having them sort of reverse that or see? I mean, I think a lot of us can say, yeah, there's definitely been times in my life or that constantly comes up of feeling unworthy, whether you're accepting, low salary somewhere or feeling unworthy in different parts of your life. How do you have them really look at that and consciously or unconsciously change that pattern forever?
well, the first 8 weeks of the journey are really about getting really honest with yourself and real. And that starts with going into the places that frighten you, or the places that you've numbed, or the places you've rejected, or the places you've denied. We call all of those kinds of things traps and hazards, where we're conditioned, not just women but men, we're all conditioned that when things don't feel good, we do whatever we possibly can to get out of that place and into a place of either numbing or running or denying or any of those things. So what I do is I get to take people into, for instance, their depths of their pain. I get to take people into the depths of their shame. I take people into the depths of their fear. And by doing that, they're able to bring up, and what's the most powerful process is that they're witnessed, because we do it in a group. So you're witnessed in those things. And then you get to realize, wow, all these things that I've been feeling, that I feel so much shame around, or that I don't want people to know about myself, is really in everybody, because we all have this to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And then we begin to get more courage from that place, and we can go into the things that are even more scary. I mean, for instance, women carry a lot of shame around their bodies, around their sexuality. And until they get really real about what that is about for them and how it shows up specifically, what ends up happening is they'll do anything not to look at it. They will, numb themselves with relationships. They'll numb themselves with food. They'll numb themselves with alcohol. They'll numb themselves with shopping.
Right.
They'll numb themselves with busyness. And all that you're doing is basically putting a cover on all of this bubbling stuff that's happening underneath the surface. But guess what? That is what's dictating your life. That's what's dictating your decisions. And so until you get underneath that cover and underneath that surface and really look at what's going on, nothing really is going to fully change. And once they're able to do that, and they're able to be witnessed in that, and they're able to be seen and loved through it, then they get to a place of, oh, okay, this isn't so bad. This isn't so shameful. This isn't so horrible. And I get to make a different choice. And I can look at things from a different perspective and a different lens. And when we do that from a cellular level, everything that has been past gets rewrote in that moment. And this is scientifically proven that the moment you do what we call a reparative experience, so something that repairs an old wound, once you're able to do that, everything before that gets shifted. So that's what we're doing. We're creating reparative experiences for people who have, been wounded, been rejected, been abused, been denied, been neglected. And the truth is we all have that on some level. We all have trauma on some level. And I think what happens for people is that unless they've gone through a horrific life where, they can pinpoint that they've been sexually abused or physically abused or some kind of horrific experience, we deny that we have some level of trauma within us. But there's, what we call low-grade traumas and high-grade traumas. And a low-grade trauma is something as simple as not getting a need met when you're a child. It could be that simple. And I think we dismiss that because we don't think it, is anything in comparison to someone who's been, say, sexually abused. Mm-hmm. And that's not true. Yes, the level of wounding is different, but it's still a trauma, because the moment we are told that we can't do something or we're not good enough at something, and it could be something verbal or nonverbal, that is a memory that lives in ourselves.
Now, it is hard to be vulnerable and talk about these things, mm-hmm. not only to yourself, but having a group, and your group, you're saying that people are coming out and they're talking about their fears or their shame. Mm-hmm. I would feel like that would be a very almost impossible thing for maybe some people to be that vulnerable and that open about things that they may have never told anybody. How do you allow them that? I'm sure you're giving them the space to open up, but some people just don't want to talk about it. What helps them being able to, talk about it in such a, vulnerable way?
Well, the core thing is, and be clear that a lot of people that come on my wilderness walks, some of them are CEOs of companies. Some of them, are entrepreneurs. There's a lot of different types of people. Some of them are stay-at-home moms. Lots of different types of people who mm-hmm. come on the walks. And the key thing is creating a safe container. And I do a lot of work around creating safety. And you'll be surprised, Margaret, because we are built that at the root of our being, as much as we fear this, there's such a strong piece of us that wants to be free of it. And so what happens is that when the desire for wanting to be free of something supersedes the actual fear of something, then people they'll tap into a courage in them that they didn't even know existed. And they will do whatever it takes to get to that place. And when they witness other people doing it with them simultaneously, they don't feel alone in the process. And so it's not like you're doing it just by yourself and everybody's watching you.
That's true.
Everybody's doing it simultaneously. And so it's actually incredibly empowering. It's incredibly empowering. And we truly believe, and this is a core belief that many people have, that if people really knew who I was, if they knew all my innermost secrets and they knew all the things that I've been through, then they wouldn't like me, or they would judge me, or they would think that I'm incapable, or they would think that I'm a fraud. But the truth is that at that core root, we are all the same.
Right.
It's just our stories that are different.
Now, if somebody were, now I think I want to just put a little warning out there for somebody that maybe is listening to this and is like, okay, I'm going to open up and I'm going to talk about my deepest truths or fears with someone. I think that if you were to decide to do something like that, it should be with someone that you fully trust, and not it to be someone that's someone that you maybe just met, or I think it needs to be either a really dear, close friend that completely doesn't judge anything that you say. Am I right? I mean, you don't really want to be this open and vulnerable to just anybody.
Well, there's layers. So what I say to people all the time is, if you're new to this process, you want to be in a safe container. So as Brene Brown says, people need to earn to hear your truth. So yes, you want to be in a safe container. You want to know that you can share what's, on your heart, what's in your innermost being. Because what happens for most people is, the reason why we're wounded in the first place is because we were in situations or circumstances where we weren't completely safe. So yes, that's absolutely true. But this is what happens over time. And, people like Liz Gilbert and Glennon Doyle Melton are great examples of this. When you get to a place of self-trust, where you really can trust yourself, then you can be much more vulnerable openly. Because look, people like Liz Gilbert, and they've put out some really raw, vulnerable stuff in their work, in their books, Brene Brown, all of these people, but they've all done a lot of their own internal healing, and they've gotten to a point where they have a lot of self-trust, so that when there is judgment, let's say, or there is criticism, that they have the ability to go to a place where they can be honoring themselves in a self-loving, self-contained way, where, for instance, if someone hasn't gotten to that place of self-trust and they expose themselves to a lot of criticism or judgment, then a lot of times that will rewound. So it really is dependent on the level of self-trust you've been able to gain throughout your own healing journey. People are in the public eye, for instance, people, like Oprah, or people who spend their lifetime in the public eye and who get criticized and judged every day. Yes, it takes a lot of self-trust to be able to move through that and not take it on as truth.
So for our listeners, is there anything that we can start doing today in order to live the fullest life that we can? Are there, can you give us 3 tools so we can start making that shift?
Yeah, well, one thing that I love, and some of this is based on the work that I do, and some of it's based on Byron Katie's work, is the first thing that we all have to identify is that we all have what I call an inner storyteller. And the storyteller gets birthed from our wounds. And so what happens is, our storyteller, in the attempt to protect us from rejection, from being hurt, will begin to tell us all kinds of things that are not true. So for instance, don't go for that job because you're going to be rejected. And the truth is, you're really not good enough for that job. So you should just, stay at home and hide and not do things. And you don't want to make a fool of yourself. You don't want to appear stupid. And all of that stuff is really just a story. But what happens is we buy into it. And by buying into it and feeding the story, we begin to believe that that's our truth. And it's not our truth. So, like in Byron Katie's work, the first thing she will say is when you make a statement or you have sort of that internal voice that says, you can't do this, you're just going to be rejected. Is that true?
Right.
Because we don't know that to be true until it happens. And so what stops most of us is not the reality, but the stories that we create that hold us back from actually stepping into our greatness, stepping into our talents and gifts. Mm-hmm. Because if we actually did that, we would actually see that it's not where all of the fear-based stories that we've had are not actually true. I've seen this over and over and over again with people who have done this, where they've begun to take more risks in their lives, and those risks have really paid off because what they're seeing is that the whole time that they've been staying small or staying stuck wasn't based on things that were actually happening. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would have to say is really identify what your traps and hazards are. And what I mean by that is look at the ways that you check out. So look at when you're uncomfortable, do you just get yourself really busy? Do you go shopping?
Right.
Do you pick up the phone and, make sure you want to find a date for Friday night? What do you do? I mean, we all have ways of numbing ourselves or distracting ourselves, and you have to really get clear about what you do personally. I mean, for women, food is a big one. A lot of women numb with food, and will numb themselves through busyness or through shopping or through all those kinds of things. So it's really important to find out the ways that you check out, the ways you distract, the ways you numb. So once you get clear on that, when you find yourself getting the impulse to do any of those things, you can stop and you can say, okay, what am I running from? What do I not want to feel? What do I not want to, look at? What do I not want to face? So that's a big one. And I would say the last one, and I think we're so guilty of this in our society, because especially, it's interesting after moving from New York to Colorado, it's such a different pace out here than back east. And it took me a long time to begin to acclimate because I'm such a type A personality. But we are so driven by busyness that what ends up happening is we don't take enough time to get still. And I believe that we all need, on some level, whatever it is for you, a way to get and tap into stillness. It could be through walking in nature. It could be through meditation. It could be through prayer. It could be through journaling. But it has to be a way that we find we can drop out of our heads into our hearts and really see what it is that's going on there. Because the truth is, Margaret, most of us are just terrified what's underneath the surface. We're terrified of looking at it.
So true. I mean, living in, I used to live in New York City. You're so right. And I see this so much. And I see, trying to avoid those feelings by doing other things, and that busyness, addiction to busyness, to, okay, these are all the things I need to do today, and just keep going and going and going. And the next thing you know, it's night, it's time for bed, and another day has come and gone, and you're not really reflecting on, what, today my job just really sucks, or this relationship really isn't what I thought it was going to be, or you don't really give your mind, your soul, your spirit time to tell you, hey, listen, there's there's a problem here. This isn't resonating with you. This is no longer in alignment with who you are, this relationship or job. And I think that we tend to just fill up our time with things, and like you said, food or alcohol, and just to kind of fill up that space, because we want to so much avoid coming face to face with that truth.
Right. And we want to avoid the pain. So, that's the thing. We will do anything. And I've seen this in countless times in doing this work for over 20 years. People don't want to feel. They don't want the pain. They don't want the discomfort. They don't want to feel the loneliness. They don't want to feel the fear. So what happens is we will do anything not to feel. So we get to a place where we almost become, I always say to people, there's that old saying, the longest journey you'll ever take is the one from the head to the heart. And it's true, because if we live in our heads and we don't have to feel, we believe that in some way, shape, or form that we're safe. And what I tell people all the time is that if that was really true, then there wouldn't be so much suffering in the world.
Right.
There's so much suffering in the world because actually we're doing everything we possibly can to avoid the truth and the pain. So I think that's the crux of it for everybody, is that if we just allowed ourselves to feel the pain, be with the pain, learn from the pain, then what will happen is actually the pain will dissipate, and we'll actually get to a place of feeling more alive because we've moved through something. Because actually, it's interesting. So many of the people that I work with, and a lot of my own personal mentors, it's so fascinating because aliveness lives in emotion. We feel, and not just what people would perceive as negative emotion, but if you don't allow yourself to feel pain, it's very hard to feel love, and it's very hard to feel joy, and it's very hard to feel those moments of happiness.
Okay.
Because what happens is we live in a very constricted spectrum where we only allow ourselves to feel to a certain extent. So in order to broaden that spectrum, we got to feel all emotions. We have to experience all emotions. And people don't want to feel the uncomfortable emotions.
Right.
They just don't want to. So, yeah.
How about women who are, dating right now, single, and they just keep attracting the same type of man that's not good for them, or they're trying to make things work, though it's not, it's just not the guy. He's not the guy for her. What do you think is blocking? Is that coming back to the unworthiness feeling?
Yeah. One of the questions I ask people all the time is, what are you tolerating? And I find this even more so with women than men. Women have this built-in ability to tolerate a lot of bullshit. Can I say that?
Oops. Yes.
Okay. So let's keep it real, right? So what happens is to the level we feel unworthy is to the level we will tolerate BS. So
I love that.
What we have to really look at is, and it all comes back to the same thing, Margaret, because the reason we stay in these relationships is, one, we don't believe that we're going to get anything better because we're really not worthy of anything better. And so we should just tolerate and put up with whatever it is that we have. Mm-hmm. And the second reason, which is probably even more of a driver and motivator, is that we don't want to feel the pain of the loss or the separation, or if we might see it or perceive it as another failure. So what happens is we stay in it and we try really hard to make it work, because it doesn't feel good when relationships end. It hurts.
Right.
And so in the attempts to avoid the pain, We stay into something, but this is the ironic part. And when I say this to people, this big light bulb goes, up over their head. And I say, well, isn't it interesting? Because you stay in the relationship to avoid the pain. And yet you're here telling me that every day you feel pain.
Right.
So it's very fascinating to me because it's not the actual pain, it's the story around the pain. See, we think that the pain of what's familiar is going to be easier than the pain of what's not familiar. And that is a big, big, big story.
But I also think that there's also women don't want to be alone. There's
Mhm.
like this fear of being alone,
Right.
I get it. I mean, I could see that. I mean, maybe people feel. I think there's the big difference between being alone and feeling lonely. And sometimes I think, I really love being alone. Sometimes I love being. I love my own company. So, and whether that is like a day of just like reading or out in nature or even taking myself out to dinner, I don't know. I love it. And I, if more women were more comfortable with maybe being with themselves and really being a little bit more introspective and not having such a fear of being alone, I think then they wouldn't be sort of scrambling to get that next date or, it just, I feel it creates all this drama, unnecessary drama, just, trying to stay with this guy but he's like an idiot but he's not, there's nobody else. So I'd rather have him than nothing. And stories that we continue to tell ourselves over and over. But I think being alone is a huge fear, right?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And a lot of us do not want to feel loneliness because loneliness feels like this big, heavy, gaping hole in, the center of our being. And we will do anything to fill that hole. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I mean, some people will fill that hole with empty sex, or they'll fill that hole with, again, food, or they'll fill it with alcohol, or they'll fill it with
Right.
distraction. But what ends up happening is that what you're doing is it's what we call a quick fix. You're filling that hole for a moment, but then what ends up happening after is that you deepen the shame, because then you
Mm,
judge yourself for your behaviors. So let's say, for instance, um, you binge eat because you're feeling lonely. The moment you finish binge eating, then you feel the shame over the binge eating.
right.
So it's actually creating a cycle of rewounding. So what I say to people all the time is, go into the loneliness, go into it, feel it, experience it. What is it showing you? What is it telling you? The moment you can begin to do that and you can sit in that discomfort without going to all of those numbing mechanisms, actually, we get to see that the loneliness is not quite as terrifying as we think that it is. And on top of that, we actually get to rewrite, as I was saying before, that script at a cellular level, because the script that we know is, oh, we're feeling something uncomfortable, we'll go and numb. So we actually change the experience by saying, okay, I'm sitting with the discomfort, and something internally begins to shift. There is no coincidence that it is through our darkest moments that we learn our deepest truths. It is no coincidence that it is in our darkest moments that we rise up into something better and something new. And it is
Yes.
because we get to a place of where we stop running. And whether we do that willingly or the universe slaps us upside the head and it's done, more externally. Like, I see this all the time. I have a lot of people who come to the wilderness walk when they're going through divorce. And the reason being is because their whole world is being broken open. And through that process, they're terrified of their future and they're grieving their past. And so, in those moments, where they're broken open, it's amazing. It's like fertile ground for something new to be planted, something new to be created. So what I say to people all the time is, whether you go into the darkness by choice or you go into the darkness by default, you're going to go into the darkness.
Right.
It's going to happen. And the universe does that not to punish us, but to wake us up. You know, we need to be woken up so that we can understand what our truth is. We need to be woken up to say that we are out of alignment. We need to be woken up because we're not listening to the calling of our spirit and our soul, but we're actually doing something the opposite of that. So the universe will wake you up and say, hey, you're not on the right path. You gotta shift course.
Right.
And so we can do that consciously or we can do it unconsciously, but it's going to happen. There's not one person that I know on this planet who has not been through some dark experience.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, these empty holes that people try to fill with things, like you said, empty sex, food, alcohol. What if, and they take your 8-week course, or they're home right now and they're trying to like, oh yeah, I do that too. And but they don't know what that is that they're trying to cover up. What is a way to figure that out?
Well, and that's where, coming in with a regular type of quote unquote spiritual practice is important, because over time, you're not going to probably know that instantaneously, but over time, with sitting with the discomfort, it will be revealed. One of the things that I really love and feel very strongly about, and I'm a strong advocate for, is journaling. Because journaling is a great way to kind of ignite the unconscious. So, the key thing is you've got to be willing. And this is what I say to people, because sometimes sitting in discomfort can feel intolerable. It can feel like you're coming out of your skin, especially if you're in pain. So what I say to people all the time is just lean into it. Sit with it for 10 minutes without going into a numbing mechanism. Then next time, sit with it for 15. Sit with it for 20. And the more you can sit with it, the more actually gets revealed. And you begin to start to excavate some of that unconscious stuff that's being repressed. And a good tool, for you to really get deeper awarenesses is through the journaling portion of it. But you also can be, this is where I think we need each other, because I say all the time, we're born in relationship, we're wounded in relationship, and we need to heal in relationship. And there's a beautiful thing that happens when we're mirrored. And this is why, there's an old Einstein quote that says, you can't solve a problem with the mind that created it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we very often need is a outside reflection of what is happening, which is why we need support systems. It is why we need a tribe of people who can do that for us. So for instance, I might be in the midst of my craziness, and someone who I love and trust can reflect back to me that, no, I'm not crazy, and that I'm actually just experiencing something that is challenging, hurtful, and painful. And when you can have those positive reflections, it actually, we begin to take ourselves out of the shame-based place, and we're able to say, yeah, I'm just going through a difficult time. This is just hard. This is just, I'm dealing with a lot of discomfort. But I always say to people, this is not something we can do alone or in isolation. True. I really believe that people need support systems, and you got to be mindful of who you choose as your support system, because your support system needs to be a safe container.
Exactly. But even going back to what you were saying about journaling, that still takes us back to having that time to sit and journal. And a lot of people don't, because they're so busy doing all kinds of other shit. So
because they're so busy numbing.
Exactly. So how do you get people to just switch it off and sit? I feel like there's so many people who are just on the go, doing the next thing and errands and laundry and then picking up the kids and then making dinner and then sitting down, writing your blog post, whatever it is. And they're like, I have no time to journal. That's stupid. I have to make money. I have to schedule these calls or whatever it is.
So this is what I say, and all of that's true. I mean, I live a very busy life. I know you live a very busy life, but this is, and that's a part of reality. Part of reality, if you have kids, if you have a high stress job, I mean, those are realities. However, this is what I know to be true. When we really want something, we make space for it. And all you have to do is think about when you're in a relationship and you're really wanting this relationship to work. Think about how much mind space and physical space that relationship takes up in your being.
Right.
You think about it all the time. You talk to your friends about it all the time. You find ways to, see this person. You find ways to make space for that person. And the reason being is because it is something you want.
Right.
And I tell people, if you really truly want to get to a place of internal peace, joy, internal acceptance, you want to get to a place where you break those patterns, then you have to create space. And, actually, Mama Gina is the one who I first heard it from her, where she said, when your desire for something gets just a little bit greater than your fear, you will do anything to create space for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. You see it in people with business all the time. People will spend thousands of dollars or take all of this time building their business. Why? Because they want it to succeed.
Right.
But the thing that they don't understand is that they are their business. And so if they don't work on the internal mechanisms that go into creating their business, then ultimately a lot of businesses fail because they self-sabotage. And the reason they self-sabotage is because they have some core belief inside of them that they are not worthy of success, that they are not worthy of abundance, that they are not worthy of stepping into their own internal power. Mm-hmm. And if you don't fix that, then you could spend a lot of time and a lot of money on a lot of relationships and a lot of businesses, and ultimately they're not going to succeed in the way that you want them to, because of those internal mechanisms.
Yeah. I hear that.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of wrapping up our call today, which was fantastic. I love this interview today. Is there anything that you wanted to leave our listeners with, and any last minute things that maybe we didn't touch upon that you would love for them to know?
The only thing that I would say, and if I could shout this from a mountaintop, I would, that if we can get to a place where we can embrace all aspects of ourselves, both dark and light, because we are made up and comprised of both dark and light. That's part of the human experience. If we can get to a place where we can embrace and accept those aspects of ourselves, that's internal freedom. That's internal freedom. And if you're continuously running from aspects of yourself, and let's face it, Margaret, we don't only run from the darkness, we run almost even more from the light, because especially women, we run from our power, and we're incredibly powerful. And the reason we run from our power is because we haven't gotten to a place where we can get to an internal acceptance of all of those aspects of ourselves. So for instance, when we deny our shame, we deny our power. When we deny our sadness, we deny our joy. When we deny our fear, we deny our love. So my big holy grail in the world, and my message that I'm most passionate about, is we got to get to a place of accepting all of who we are, so that we can come fully alive, because it's that old Howard Thurman quote, that's what the world needs. We need more people to come alive. So that's the biggest thing. If you want to step into your power and you want to step into love and step into your fear and step into, all of those other places within you that you don't want to look at.
So are you saying that women, in order to embrace, because we are so powerful, in order to really step into that and really own it, it's really also owning our dark, our light. It's owning everything, all of our emotions fully, to the fullest capacity that we can. Is that right? Rather than numbing, shaming, pushing away, pushing down, all of that. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100%, because this is where I go back to what I said earlier, that in our darkness often lies our deepest truth. And the healing and the magic happens when we can look at those aspects of ourselves through the lens of love and acceptance. That then we can go into the world and fully stand in our power and say, you know what? Yes, this is all of who I am, and all of it is beautiful, and all of it is divine.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can get to a place where you can say all of it, including all of those things that you judge about yourself, are beautiful and divine, that's power.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. I have to just take that in. That's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
And I hope it's resonating for our listeners. And I hope that it's sparking something in them to really stop shaming those parts that you feel are not acceptable or that you don't weigh a certain amount or whatever it is, and fully embrace who you are on every level possible, because that's really where our strength and our power lies.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Well, I've got 3 quick questions for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is your biggest indulgence?
Ooh. My biggest indulgence, just because it's the place where I feel most at peace and the place that I feel most connected to the divine, is my time in nature. I indulge in that pretty much daily. So that to me is that's like my hot fudge sundae.
And what's currently at your bedside?
Um, a glass of water, because I constantly have to remind myself the importance of hydration, especially when you live out in Colorado. But I have an altar that I have
Ooh.
in my bedroom space. That is the first thing I look at every morning when I wake up. And I also strongly believe in the importance of creating sacred space. So to me, to look at my altar and to start my day with that impression and everything that's in my altar that's very important and near and dear to my heart, is something that feeds my soul.
Oh, I love it. Tell me something that's on your altar.
Oh my God. One of the special things is on my altar. Well, one is that I have something from every wilderness walk. So
Oh,
everywhere I go on my wilderness walks, I take a piece of Mother Earth and bring back to my altar. And one of the things that I got was when I was in New Mexico doing a wilderness walk, and I went to the Sanctuario de Chamayo,
yeah.
where I have that healing sand,
Yes.
sacred sand, and I took some of that sand and I have that on my altar. So
Oh, yes. The Sanctuario is a very sacred place in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the story goes that they found a crucifix, and then it was moved, and then they found it back again, back in this like hole in the ground, which they now say that has healing power. So people come from all over the world to be healed. And they have this the I don't know if you want to call it the sand or the dirt, the earth, And people take that home. They also leave pictures and all of that. And so there's a special saint that they made a chapel for, Santo Niño de Atocha, and it's a beautiful little chapel in there, and it's such a sacred place. And during Holy Week, for Good Friday, people walk from as far, even farther than Albuquerque, with crosses on their shoulders, and they walk pilgrimage up to the Santuario. And when I used to live out there, I used to do partial walks. I didn't walk that far, but I walked for a few hours on Good Friday. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people that do it. It's an amazing sight. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then my last question is, are you reading any books right now?
Yeah, well, I just finished Love Warrior, which I know everybody and their sister is reading right now. And I actually just had the pleasure of going to see Glennon Doyle Milton on her Together tour that was out here in Denver. And I have to say, it was so refreshing to go because, you know, as a healer, I go to a lot of different events and conferences. But there was something so real and raw and vulnerable about this experience, because there were a group of women who were just talking about everything we have just spent the last hour talking about, Margaret. And there was like not a dry eye in the whole place. And It was just so intentionally beautiful. And, you know, I have to say that one of the things that I find most refreshing is women who have been on their healing journey for a while and who are willing to publicly be a beautiful example of what it means to be both dark and light. So that was, yeah.
Well, this has been such a beautiful interview. Thank you so much. I have so many notes. It has been not only eye-opening, but also so resonating for me. And I hope this message gets carried far and wide, because it's something that we as women need to hear. We need to own who we really are, and to stop hiding those parts of us that are the most beautiful parts and magnificent parts of us. So thank you, Suzanne. Oh, and actually, before I end this call, how can we find you? Tell us where and when is your next wilderness walk and all of that.
Okay, so you can find me on thewildernesswalk.com. So it's THEWILDERNESS walk, WALK.com. You can also go to SuzanneHanna.com, so both websites. You can find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And my next wilderness walk is going to be beginning in May. So anyone who's interested or wants to learn more about it, you can reach out.
Where's that going to be?
That one's going to be up in the Catskill Mountains in New York.
Oh, very nice.
So it's going to be close to you, Mama.
Yeah. All right. Well, Suzanne, always a pleasure. Love connecting with you. I have to come visit you in Colorado.
Yes.
Have a blessed day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this interview, I would love for you to head on over to iTunes and leave a review. To learn more about Suzanne and for all the show notes, you can find it at margaretromero.com/episode 6. And to continue the conversation, join us at the private Facebook group at margaretromero.com/Facebook. See you next week.